Would you say they're even worse than Al-Qaeda?
Well, you know, people say that, but you know, if you look at some of the things that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban did in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and in other places in Mali, I mean, to me, it's kind of a silly thing. This is of the same kind.
The same type of brutality is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, it seems one of the Islamic State's biggest strength is the ability to make money. In 2007, it already had an estimated $1 billion in assets. And the blog Money Jihad has done research into where the money is now. First, oil. Islamic State controls more than half of the oil in Syria. And in Iraq, it controls 2 oil fields and a refinery. And of course, then there's the fundraising. It has lots of money coming in from places like Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, even Indonesia. And in terms of infrastructure, it's gotten pretty lucrative, assets here. We're talking about dams in cities like Mosul and Fallujah, arms depots. It's one thing to seize an oil field. It's another to sell that oil. Right. How connected is Islamic State to the global market?
So there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, they're well practiced at this. They're using tactics that really go back to what were used against the Russians in Afghanistan, setting up the pipeline to bring foreign fighters in, to bring support in, to bring financial aid in. So they've done this again and again. They did it in Iraq back in the Sunni Triangle insurgency. They did it in Mali. They did it in Libya. They did it in Syria. They did it in Yemen. So this is kind of out of the playbook. So you set those networks up. So where's the funding come from? So it's coming from rich independent sources in some families in Saudi Arabia and other countries. In some cases, it may be coming from governments like the Qataris. It's also being raised on the internet and through people giving through legitimate charities and giving on the internet. So there's a small donor aspect to that. And you have to remember, as they overran territory, they overran banks and other things, and they seized an enormous amount of assets. And then finally, you have to remember, this is the part of the world where smuggling is the name of the game. Smuggling resources, including oil, is a time-honored tradition. So that's another aspect of that. So there's plenty of economic ways to drive the economy.
And they seem to be very savvy when it comes to social media. We've certainly seen some pretty chilling videos of executions posted online.
You know, to me, this is the scariest thing about ISIS, is what they have done is nothing new, but they have refined the insurgent and terrorist tactics that we've seen over the past decades, and they're using all of them, from bringing in foreign fighters to operating on social media. Mm-hmm. And if you look at their operational strategy, their operational tactics, they've actually been pretty savvy as well. You know, they didn't try to roll into Baghdad, which may have been an overstretch and reach too far. They actually kind of took a strategic pause. They consolidated their gains. They've been going through the military equipment they have, but they've been reorganizing. They've been looking for gaps and weak spots, which is why they went after the Kurds. So that they're pretty well organized. And the other thing is you have to remember, ISIS or ISIL or whatever, mm-hmm. This isn't 50,000 people. It's a relatively small group, one of several Islamic factions, which includes people from inside Iraq and Syria and foreign fighters. And so they're pulling together this kind of coalition, and they've got to hold that coalition together as well. So you know, what they've done is very troubling.
Do you think the U.S. administration, the U.S. government bears some responsibility here? I mean, some of these weapons that they have came from the Iraqi government, and U.S. provided those weapons to Iraq. I mean, I know there's plenty of blame to go around, but how can the U.S. make sure this never happens again?
Well, you can never make sure anything never happens again. So, and you raise a good point, which is we could sit around and say, how did we get here? But you know, it's kind of irrelevant. We have essentially, which could be the Taliban like of Afghanistan. I mean, the country that we saw on September 10th, 2001, sitting in the middle of the Middle East, much closer to the West, much closer, and a much more important neighborhood of the world that could be much more troubling. So this is a very, very, very serious problem, and dealing with it is a very, very serious priority for the United States, for other Western nations, and for many countries in the Middle East. So it is a serious issue that we just can't just sit back and watch it metastasize.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim Carafano.
Thanks for having me.